It seems like after every single IndyCar oval race, the same debate rages. Should IndyCar do a green white checker finish, overtime, to finish the race, or at least try to finish the race under the green flag? And the answer is always no. But if you'd like to hear why the answer is no, stay tuned. I'm going to explain it to you. So I shouldn't even really be justifying this talking point with a video, but I feel like it's necessary enough to do it because I'm frustrated that this is what we're talking about after one of the best IndyCar races that I've personally ever been to. Positivity across the board for the racing product that IndyCar's technical committee, the drivers, the teams were able to put on at Texas Motor Speedway. What an improvement. What an improvement. We should be talking about, ticket sales. We should be talking about, rivalries on track. But no, we're debating whether or not IndyCar should have orchestrated or attempted to orchestrate a green flag finish when, unfortunately, the natural progression of this particular race was that while Pato O'Ward was charging on Joseph Newgarden, and we would have probably seen one of the classic close finishes at Texas, Romain Grosjean spun coming off of turn number 2, trying to pass David Malukas for what was 4th place, got into the outside wall. The race ended under yellow. And anytime this happens, we hear the debate. Oh, they should have finished under green. They should do green-white checker. NASCAR does for green-white checker. Why can't IndyCar do green-white checker? And the reasons are numerous. The reasons I think are obvious, but for some reason we still have this debate coming up, so maybe they're not as obvious as they seem to me. And we'll just start with the easy one, which is purity. The purity of IndyCar's product, the thing that they, lord over everything else, the thing that they raise up, and rightly so. The first 2 races of the season were fantastic, but it's the purity of the racing. It's the close competition of the racing. It's the fact that you hear the drivers, the teams, everyone talk about, especially when they come from another discipline, whether you're talking Formula One, whether you're talking whatever, they say, hey, this is really cool to, the green comes out, and that doesn't mean, there's not another guaranteed time where the green isn't going to be out. An IndyCar race can go green from start to finish. Anything that happens between that green flag and the checkered flag, for the most part, is exactly how the race should have played out. That's great, I think, for the drivers, for the teams, for the ability to, be a media member for the series, to promote the series, to talk about the series, because the drivers who win the races, the teams that win the races, the manufacturers that win the races, they earned it. Pure and simple. When you start throwing in green-white checkers, when you start throwing in, stage cautions, you affect the race. You don't necessarily, well, you do. It is a manipulation of some description. It is not, a biased manipulation. It's a predetermined rule, but it is a manipulation. I think the greatest example, I really have 2 examples, but the greatest example of this was NASCAR at COTA a couple of weeks ago. For the most part, because they took the stage cautions out, that was classic NASCAR for the first 95% of the race. It was beating and banging. It was comers and goers. It was strategy. The cream rising to the top. I mean, you had a lot of the young stars doing battle at the end of the race. And then, of course, you also had the wily veteran in there with Kyle Busch. But you had a pure NASCAR race that was unpredictable, exciting. It was what grew NASCAR to being the unstoppable juggernaut that it is. Unfortunately, there was a caution called towards the end of the race. You got a green-white checker, and you got another green-white checker, and then you got another green-white checker, and then you got another. And the race that was such an enjoyable, experience, pretty much start to finish, in my opinion, was completely tarnished by the end of it, and how silly all of the wrecks were and how many of them there were, and it was unfortunate. And I think that, to me, is what separated NASCAR at COTA and IndyCar at Texas. is that Joseph Newgarden absolutely deserved to win the race. Did Pato dominate it? Sure. Did Joseph pass Pato? Yep. Did he pass him before the yellow came out? Yep. Does that mean that Joseph didn't deserve to win it? Joseph deserved to win the race. Actually, the winning pass was on Alex Palou, who, you want to talk about strategy, stayed on old tires. So you had a guy on old tires, and you had two guys on new tires, the two guys that had dominated the race. It was coming down to a duel between Joseph and Pato. And it would have been an absolute all-timer had it finished under green. But the race is 375 miles. And if you don't let it reach its conclusion when it's scheduled, you end up with what I witnessed at Texas Motor Speedway for the NASCAR Truck Series. A bit of a similar situation. You had a dominant driver, Nick Sanchez. You had a driver who was kind of able to challenge him in Zane Smith. And then you kind of had the third guy in there, playing the role of Alex Palou, was Carson Hocevar. But in the NASCAR race, when the yellow came out towards the end, I think it was the Dean Thompson wreck, the thing that got more viewership than like all the other races' actual TV viewership combined on YouTube, you had green, white checkers. And, Nick Sanchez each time met the challenge, got out in front, there was another wreck, another yellow. And eventually, the piper had to be paid. And they got to the white flag. Sanchez got into Smith and then got plowed by Hocevar, and two cars went into the wall. Carson Hocevar won. You can do that in NASCAR trucks. It's unfortunate that a driver who had a career day in Nick Sanchez wasn't able to actually be rewarded for that. The record book will not reflect it. And I certainly hope that he has another opportunity to win a race soon, because this racing sport moves very, very quickly. And believe it or not, you don't get that many opportunities when you have that good of a day. So I hope he gets another opportunity to win a race soon. I would be disappointed if that took away a potential career-changing win from young Nick Sanchez. But just imagine if IndyCar had done that, and let's say, a dominant performance from Alex Palou or an equally dominant but slightly less so performance from Joseph Newgarden would have been overshadowed because the two of them would have gone into the wall. And it would have been great to see David Malukas take a win, his first IndyCar win on an oval. Yeah, that would have been great to see, but do we really want to see it under those circumstances? The second, and perhaps most important from an IndyCar perspective, even more so than the fact that their entire marketing is built around pure good racing, is the fact that inherently, by the design of the cars, Indy cars are different. If you watched the Texas race, you saw a very frightening accident involving Devlin DeFrancesco and Graham Rahal. No intention between any driver to have an accident. They weren't even running close together on the racetrack. But Devlin got into the wall on his own. The car broke as he was trying to get onto the apron, and he came back up across traffic, and Graham Rahal went over the back of him. Was very lucky that he did not end up in the catch fence. Open-wheel cars, when they crash, you're not having an automobile crash at that point. You're having an airplane crash. There are justifiable risks in racing, and I would argue that you can justify racing open-wheel cars on a 200-mile-an-hour oval, even inches apart. These are the best drivers, the best teams in the world for this reason. They are prepared for this challenge. But you have to protect them to a certain degree. Oval racing is going to have unpredictable risks, like we saw with Devlin. Catching the wall, car breaks as he's trying to get it off the racing surface, collects another car. That could have been a disastrous accident. There are 2 points of inherent risk in an IndyCar race. It's when the green flag comes out, and it's when that checkered flag comes out. Those are the 2 most dangerous times in an auto race, particularly an open-wheel auto race. It's when the cars are the closest together. It's when the drivers are the most antsy, the most amped up, the most willing to take risks. Those are justifiable risks. And then everything in between the green flag and the checkered flag, it's completely up to the drivers and let's be honest, the mechanical ability of the cars that they're piloting to, up the risk factor or bring the risk factor down. There are some things you can't avoid, like Devlin and Graham's crash, and there are some things you can avoid. You look back to St. Pete, obviously a much different situation, a lot lower speed, but the leaders crashing into each other, Scott McLaughlin and Romain Grosjean. That was probably that was an avoidable accident. That shouldn't have happened, but it did because the drivers chose at that particular time to take a risk. It ended in a crash. That could have happened at Texas at any point between Pato and Joseph. But here's the deal. The risk factor at an IndyCar race has two flags, green flag, checkered flag. Those are the two risk factors determined by the series. If they started doing chases or stages, you add two risk factor flags to that equation because everybody is expecting that to happen. And so they know that, hey, if I can't pass anybody, this is going to be my best opportunity to do it. You see it in the NASCAR races. There's a lot of crashes around the stages. It just happens. The checkered flag amps that up even more. When you have more than one opportunity to go get the checkered flag in an auto race, the risks are exponentially raised. Think back to Ryan Newman at the Daytona 500 in 2020. Think back to really any Daytona 500, but that's obviously the example where someone did get hurt. Indy cars, the risk factor is higher. The speeds are higher. The cars, by their nature, can have much more savage accidents. From my perspective, I think the drivers would tend to agree with me. I know the teams would because they're also, you're not just risking limb out there. As bad as it is to say, the team owners, the sponsors, they're risking money. The race promoters risking insurance. Everybody's got a lot of money into hoping that the race is safe. I just don't think it's worth the risk to do it. NASCAR didn't triple IndyCar's TV rating on cable because IndyCar didn't do a green-white checker. There's a million more issues than green-white checkers. In fact, I would even go as far to say the Indy 500 finish last year should not have been red flagged. They should have just ended it under caution because nothing was going to change, and nothing did change. The only thing that changed was one of your few Indy-only teams left with Sage Karam and Dreyer Reinbold ended up with a big crash repair bill that they didn't need. And thank God the wreck wasn't any bigger because maybe I'm just, Rain Man with IndyCar racing. But I think everybody and their brother could see that there was going to be some sort of a wreck when they red flagged the race and gave them essentially a green-white checker to finish the Indy 500. And you want to talk about the Indy 500? There's literally a quote. Al Unser Jr. says, at the end of an Indy 500, there's a point where living doesn't matter, right? You only want to have a time in a race once. I think it's acceptable risk once where living doesn't matter. That's what separates this sport from all the other ones. But when you do it 2, 3, 4 times, when something bad happens, because it's not an if, it's a when with green-white checkers, it's almost negligent at that point. So from my perspective, and I think I have a pretty good one, especially for open wheel racing, you can't do this. You can never do it. It's unfeasible. It's unsafe. And frankly, it doesn't change the show all that much. And if it does, it only changes it negatively. I just mentioned the TV ratings, right? What gets the TV ratings up isn't necessarily the product that happens on track. As bad as that is to say, as unfortunate as that is to say, it's more about momentum when the cars are not on track. That actually gets people to tune in. I look at the basketball, the women's tournament recently, the women's NCAA tournament, which got like 9 million viewers. And they got 9 million viewers because there's some intense rivalry between two of the girls playing the basketball game. And the media hyped that up. Those are the things that get that momentum going. So, I mentioned this on Twitter today. I think if we had had St. Pete a little bit closer to Texas. I mean, I remember I asked a couple of questions in the bullpen that were, kind of referring to St. Pete, and I just kind of sat there thinking afterwards, I'm like, that was 4 weeks ago. I don't think anybody even remembers or care. And by remembers, I mean the audience. Does anyone in the audience really remember or care about, everyone crapping on Benjamin Peterson? Do they even remember or care about, McLaughlin and Grosjean crashing into each other? It happened so long ago, and so many other racing series and so many other dramatic things have happened in racing since then. I don't know. Maybe getting the schedule together, keeping that, because again, the on-track racing product, St. Pete to Texas, it's been so good. The sport is the actual sport, green to checker. They don't need to touch. They just don't need to touch it right now. It's fine. It's everything else. Green white checkers do not belong in IndyCar racing. I hope you've enjoyed this. It felt like doing an emergency broadcast here. I'm not feeling very well. I don't know if you could tell. I got a little bit sick in Texas, so I'm going to try to hydrate and recover over the next couple days, and I'll see you in the next video.